All right, I'm here with Dr. Karen Strange with the Center for Sexual and Relational Health in Greenville, South Carolina, and a colleague of mine and who I admire and respect in the work of therapy around sexuality, around betrayal trauma, recovery from addictions, and a lot more. So, Karen, thank you for being here. Is there anything else you'd like to say about yourself?
Well, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to share with your listeners, the privilege I have of sharing with your listeners on this topic. I know it's a tender topic for a lot of people, and I want to be really respectful of that. And also to thank you for the work that you do because it's unique and it is very valuable. So thank you for what you do and for letting me be a part of this opportunity today.
Awesome. I'm going to make sure that while we're recording, we can see both of us because I've done this before where I hide my self view while I'm talking. And then when I
Oh,
record, it's just the one person talking. So we're all
okay.
set. We can see both
Okay.
of us.
That's good.
So when I was talking to you, Karen, about topics, you brought up something I feel is really important for men in general, for anyone really. Um, Obviously, I do a lot of work with men, letting go of compulsive sexual behavior or problematic sexual behavior, and this idea of what is healthy sexuality.
Hmm.
Uh, a lot of times, men will come to me and they know what's not working,
Hmm.
and that's a pain point. But casting a vision for a healthy sexuality that's not the same as intercourse. Healthy sexuality is not equal intercourse. Just it's not. Yeah.
Correct. Yes.
So and even like the idea of like intimacy, right? Sometimes intimacy is like a word that's used equally with sexual intercourse. Like my partner and I were intimate.
Hmm.
Well, you know that's one sex is one expression of intimacy, but it's
Right.
not the end. So all that to say, I'm so interested to hear your perspective, what your work around healthy sexuality, and what you want to share.
Yeah. So one of the things that's really important to me that I just take really seriously in my work as I'm working either with someone with the problematic behavior or with their betrayed partner is once that both of the partners have done a fair amount of individual healing and maybe have some couples work under their belt, we do a process of sexual reintegration. And I like to let people know, and I think they know this, but I say that if your sex education came from pornography, you received a very poor sex education.
Mm-hmm.
And you do tend to think of sex and intimacy. Many people tend to think of sex and intimacy as being synonyms. But
Mm-hmm.
I do think that intimacy is a much broader picture. Alex Avila has a book called 40 Forms of Intimacy. Dr. Kevin Skinner created an intimacy triangle that Dr. Hal Stewart contributed to, and then I added something by Dr. Marilyn Volker, which is, if you think of a pyramid, the
Mm-hmm.
base of the pyramid is psychological intimacy. And so, psychological intimacy is commitment, honesty, loyalty, and trust. If those things are not in place, the chances of you having a really healthy sexual relationship are diminished because just that foundation is shifting sand.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even have some of these forms of intimacy with other people. For example, the next step on that intimacy triangle is verbal intimacy. Well, you and I are having verbal intimacy right now, but you certainly want to have it with your partner. Like guess who I saw in the grocery store today, or I heard they're building this downtown, or just sharing about your day.
Mm-hmm.
Verbal intimacy. Then there's emotional intimacy, and that's the ability to be able to hold your partner's emotions without trying to fix them. I know that we're uncomfortable when our partners are uncomfortable, and we want to fix things a lot. And but being able to just sit with somebody when they're dysregulated or they're just sad or whatever the emotion is, and just be there with them in that. So there's that emotional intimacy component. On top of that is cognitive intimacy, and that's being able to describe ideas with your partner, and discuss ideas and being okay if your partner does not think like you. Because as Dr. Harville Hendricks said, you didn't marry yourself. Your partner has different ideas
Mhm.
than you do, and being able to be okay if you think differently. I have a memory when I was growing up, during the election when Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan were running against one another, being at the dinner table one night, and my father saying who he was going to vote for, and my mother saying who she was going to vote for, and they were the opposite. And my dad just kind of laughed and he said, well, our votes will cancel one another out, but it's okay.
Mm.
Nobody got bent out of shape,
Wow.
and so just being able to be okay with that. Dr. Hal Stewart added creative intimacy, which is, finding something, an example would be like perhaps there's a part of your property or your yard that looks kind of barren and like needs sprucing up. And creative intimacy would be like, hey, let's go to Lowe's and get some flowers and plant the flowers out there. Or I've got a new recipe I want to try. I can't wait to get your opinion of it. Being able to share creative energy in a healthy
Mm.
way.
Mhm.
Then there's aesthetic intimacy, and that's from Dr. Marilyn Volker. And aesthetic intimacy is being able to appreciate beauty together.
Mm.
And it could be something like maybe going to the symphony, or going for a walk on the beach, or watching a sunset, a hike, anything that the two of you can share beauty
Mm.
together. Then there's spiritual intimacy, and that could include sharing a common faith. It can include prayer, meditation, any type of the things that where you're being drawn closer to God, your higher power. And then sitting at the pinnacle of that triangle is sexual intimacy.
Mm.
We live in a culture that has that triangle upside down.
I was about to say the same thing.
Yeah. It's just upside down, and that triangle cannot stand like that.
Mhm.
That's why you need that firm foundation of commitment, honesty, loyalty, and trust. Because there's a lot of people having a lot of sex
Mhm.
that have zero intimacy, when in reality, what they're really longing for in their heart of hearts is to be known.
Mhm.
And intimacy, I heard it, Dr. Douglas Rosenau, who is one of my supervisors in my sex therapy training, it's into me. See, we've heard that, for years, but that's what we're longing for. But certainly what porn has done, acting out sexually outside of your relationship, it has distorted that.
Mhm.
And so I always like to educate people on that intimacy triangle, because I think it's just good to know that intimacy doesn't always have to look like intercourse.
Mhm.
I think in terms of maybe after a woman's had a baby, when you're not supposed to be having intercourse, you can still have sweet times together of intimacy
Mhm.
that don't necessarily include sexual intercourse. Or perhaps as a man ages and he has erectile issues, maybe has prostate surgery. If you're just banking on intercourse to be the reflection of your intimacy, that's going to really hurt. But if you have a broad view of that, it can be really helpful when you're in those in between times.
Yes. I'm I'm thinking about, in some parts of our culture, the playbook that's been given to men in terms of sexuality is very, very narrow.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
it's and what you're describing in that pyramid to me, as I'm making a couple notes here, is something very expansive.
Hmm. Yes.
Like so many options, actually, so many options for sexuality. It just feels very robust
Hmm.
and almost like the ingredients for an awesome sex life. I,
Speaking of ingredients, I mean, that reminds me of a visual that I saw in a book called Redeeming Sex. And the woman that wrote it, I think, is Deb Hirsch. But she likens our sexuality to not like if you think of a pie chart, somebody might say, well, a slice of that pie chart, slice of that circle is my sexuality.
Mhm.
She would say, no, that it's you have the circle, but your sexuality is like the flavoring of a cake.
Mhm.
So it permeates all aspects of
Mhm.
how you relate to other people. So she describes a social sexuality,
Mhm.
which is the fact it's the way you interact with people. It's how the fact that I'm female impacts how I think, how I dress, how I choose to live. All of those things is who my friends are are based on my social sexuality. And the same for you
Mhm.
with the fact that you're a male. And that's a
Mhm.
good thing. But it's just a nice way to look at it. That's not like some little part of us that we're trying to keep back. It's how
That's
can
right.
we have this in a healthy way?
That's right. What is the name of that pyramid you're talking about again?
It's the intimacy pyramid.
The intimacy pyramid, and developed primarily by Dr. Patrick Carnes.
No, Dr. Kevin Skinner.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then, but you contributed Hal
Well,
Stewart.
Dr. Hal Stewart did, and then I added Marilyn Volker's work. I love that whole concept of aesthetic beauty, enjoying aesthetic
Mm,
beauty together, and Dr. Volker had come up with that. Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
So I do have a question here because I work with some men who are single,
Hmm.
or and so they'll have different practices of sexuality, uh,
Hmm.
whether intercourse or not intercourse. But also I work with some men in different religious traditions
Hmm.
that have made vows to celibacy.
Hmm.
And I'm curious if this intimacy triangle developed by Skinner, could this translate? Could this translate to people who are maybe for a long period have committed to celibacy, or maybe a lifetime? Can they still find healthy sexuality in that pyramid?
So for me personally, because I'm a widow and I'm not having sex, I have learned that yes, the answer to your question is yes. And that for me, sexual energy under control is creative energy.
Mm,
And so that doesn't mean you're going to start necessarily doing needlework and hooking rugs and all of that stuff, but it can be to build deeper relationships, to take your ideas and grow those and see those come to fruition, which a lot of times, if you're in a relationship with another person, a lot of your energy is being siphoned that way.
mhm,
But sexuality under control is allows for creativity to flow, and that includes in a
mhm,
relationship, but
mhm.
also I think in terms of when there is perhaps a commitment to not have sex.
Yeah, I really like that. That truth is like the sexuality and whatever limits or commitments I've made around my values,
Hmm.
around my sexuality. That's kind of like the my bear, my guardrails.
Hmm.
So that funneled sexuality, you said, is creative energy.
Oh, yes. Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you're talking about the pyramid, I'm thinking, yeah, like psychological intimacy. Like this is available to everyone, no matter what sort of
Hmm.
relationship you're in. Verbal, emotional. I mean, it's almost like all the way up to, and if you have if you have a boundary on the intercourse bit
Hmm.
at the very top, that seems like the only
Hmm.
place where it doesn't translate exactly.
Right.
Um, but still, it feels like a lot of sexuality in that base, that bottom part of the pyramid.
Well, and to me, that kind of goes back to that whole concept of it being like the flavoring of a cake. It
Mm,
permeates everything. And
mm,
I could even say, in terms of even the top of the pyramid, maybe you're not having genital sex, because Deb Hirsch talks about there's social sexuality and genital
mm,
sexuality. So, genital sexuality would be intercourse, it would be, what historically we tend to think of as sex. But it would certainly encompass That's social sexuality, which is, interacting in the world
Mm,
as, who you are as a man or a woman.
yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Karen. I'm so glad you brought in that pyramid. Thank you, Dr. Skinner, who invented that, and all the contributors. And
Yes.
so good talking with you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.